Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast, your guide to optimizing your life one health tip at a time. This podcast is designed to entertain and inform, not to provide medical or health advice. Always consult your doctor when it comes to your personal health or before you make any changes to your diet, exercise, or lifestyle.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Coach Kyle.
And I'm Dr. K. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss adrenal fatigue. We're going to talk about kind of why it happens, the stages of it, and methods that we use to treat it, and also some maybe inconsistent methods that we've heard about that we don't necessarily recommend.
Very nice. So let's get some adrenaline. It doesn't come from there.
No, that was...
That's a neurochemical. Does not have to do with the... I guess it does. Does it come from the adrenals? I think it does.
Adrenaline? Probably. That's probably why it's named that, but I can't say that I know all that much about adrenaline.
So adrenal fatigue, it's kind of been a little controversial, right?
Well, basically, everyone thinks that they have adrenal fatigue because they're tired.
So it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation.
I mean, could it be the reason that you're tired? Absolutely. But adrenal fatigue is a very specific thing with markers and such, and symptoms and stages. And you can't just wake up tomorrow and decide you have adrenal fatigue, and that's why you don't want to go to work.
Yeah, because it very well could be your low testosterone, or your low thyroid, or your diet that's not good, or the fact that you're just inflamed, or heavy metals, or mold, or etc.
Correct. There's so many different factors. And what I found, and I get this a lot with my patients, adrenal fatigue, even if they do have it, is usually a symptom of something else going on.
Yeah. So, like, you say it's a symptom of something else going on. Usually, what's the culprit when you start to dig in? Is it like heavy metals?
Well, it's usually something, whatever it is we find. But basically, adrenals are they're responding to stress. And so the more stressed you are, the more they respond. And eventually, they can't respond. So I put it really simply is adrenals are like a sponge, and you have hormones going into them, you have hormones coming out of them. So normally, imagine a sponge, and the tap is dripping on it, drip, 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 and that's how they get refilled throughout your life. And every time you need them, you squeeze, and because they're wet, some comes out. But when you constantly keep squeezing them, they're not getting refilled fast enough, and so they start to dry out. And that's what adrenal fatigue is.
Gotcha. Okay, so these are an organ, I assume, the adrenals, and they sit on top of your kidney.
Right above the kidneys.
Yeah. So is there, because we talked a little bit about, like hypogonadism, low testosterone because of testicular injury. Is there any time that like there's a physical injury or something maybe affects it that could cause that? Or is it really just lifestyle related?
Physical injury to your adrenals, you'd have so much other organ damage that would probably be your lesser concern. It's more so, physiologic stressors that tend to affect them.
Gotcha. So physiological stressors, you mentioned these squeezes. How are we squeezing our adrenals? Like what are the things that we're doing that is causing that to squeeze?
It's all hormone mediated. Body releases certain hormones that trigger the adrenals to release other hormones.
Gotcha. So squeezes would be like a high stress lifestyle.
Yes. So cortisol. Cortisol is the main thing. And I feel like most people have heard of that one. I don't want to start saying a bunch of names that people have never heard of and just a whole rabbit hole. Yeah. But cortisol people have heard of. That's the primary driver.
Okay. So when I came to see you, I had a doctor tell me that I was in, I think it was like stage 3 or 4 adrenal fatigue. So, do you want to walk through the stages, or do you want, you want to go ahead and handle?
Absolutely. So there are 4 stages of adrenal fatigue, and it's not a straight downward curve. It's actually a up and then down. So you start with, if you're healthy, that's good. You're in good health. Then you go into stage 1. That's where your cortisol levels actually start to slowly rise. And so what happens is your cortisol is supposed to spike in the morning around 8 a.m. and then decline throughout the day and be at its lowest point when you're sleeping and then spike again at 8 a.m. when you wake up and decline throughout the day. That's how it's supposed to run. So what happens is in stage 1, your body starts, it's called alarm stage. And so your cortisol levels start to rise higher than they should be throughout the day. And you start to feel the effects of that because, you're going to have too much hormones and it's going to affect other hormones and you start to feel tired. And then as you stay in that alarm stage, eventually your body is going to get used to those levels and you're going to go into what's called the resistance stage. This is similar to diabetes, where your body becomes really resistant to those incoming hormones. And actually your levels start to climb up really, really high and sit really high. So you may actually feel better in this stage. So I get people like this all the time. They go, oh, I used to have adrenal fatigue, but now my cortisol is really good. All my levels are higher than they should be. I'm great. I'm like, actually, no, that's not a good thing. You're just in stage 2. Give it another year or so, and you'll enter what we call stage 3, which is the exhaustion stage. This is when the adrenal is really starting to dry out. And now every squeeze, you're really wringing that sponge to get out every last drop of the hormones until eventually you reach stage 4, or the burnout stage. And in the burnout stage, your adrenals have nothing left. And this is when you crash. You really want to avoid stage 4 because this is when you go into bed and you never want to get out of bed again.
Yeah. So when I came into you, I was in between like stage 3 and 4. And my cortisol, I did a Dutch test. So a Dutch test is basically a timed urine test that tests your cortisol throughout 4 time points in the day. And my cortisol was below where it should have been the entire day. So I should have had this spike, and then it kind of falls off towards the end of the day. And it said it was just kind of low with a little tiny bump, and then just stayed low whole day.
Yeah, that's the end of stage 3, because stage 4 is just a flat line.
Yeah. So I was approaching stage 4 when I came to you. So I have heard of, fatigue resets, or
hold on. Before we jump into how to treat it, let's talk a little bit more about the Dutch test, because that probably is the best adrenal fatigue test out there. Unfortunately, it is a cash pay test. Insurance doesn't cover it. It runs through a specialty lab. The only thing that you can do that your insurance covers is a AM cortisol drawn between 7 and 9 in the morning. It's a 1-point marker, and it is a good intro test to see if you have to spend the cash on the Dutch test. If your AM cortisol is out of line, then yes, do the Dutch test so we can get a better idea of what's actually happening. You want to explain the Dutch test a little bit more?
Yeah. So the Dutch test, it actually goes into a lot of different hormone markers. But it's a test basically, and how you take it is there's 4 timings. So there's like a few hours, like afternoon, there's night, there's in the middle of the night if you wake up, there's morning, and there's like late morning. And so what you do is each of those times you pee on this little strip, and then you like hang it up to dry, and it dries. So that's why it's called a Dutch test. It's a dried urine. I don't know the rest of the acronym, but that's the beginning of it. So basically what it tests is your hormones and your metabolites from those collections. And so in relation to cortisol, it tests your levels on a curve on where they should be. So your cortisol, like we said, it varies during the day. Like it shouldn't be high at night, but it should be high in the morning, but it shouldn't be too high. So there are levels that should be in. And then it plots your levels on this graph, so it shows you exactly where you are in comparison to the optimal range of where you should be. And besides that, it does 50 plus other hormone markers, testosterone, all of its metabolites, estrogen, all of its metabolites. So if you want to go really deep on hormones and get into like how they're functioning, where your roadblocks are, and test for adrenal fatigue, the Dutch test is probably your go-to.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that's a summary.
No, that was a good summary. So just one more thing I want to add. So cortisol throughout the day, it's kind of like a ticking clock. And, as that gear turns in the clock, it's going to turn other gears to adjust other things around it. So if your cortisol isn't timed properly, if you're spiking at the wrong time, it's throwing off your circadian rhythm.
Which means you're going to get worse sleep, which means you're going to be more tired, which means you're going to need more cortisol to get you going the next day, which is going to push you further into adrenal fatigue.
Yep.
It's like a death loop.
That's exactly what it is.
You just get caught in it, and it's hard to get out.
Yep.
So if I have adrenal fatigue, I should just drink more coffee, right?
No, that's a terrible idea. Then you're squeezing that sponge even harder and drying it out faster.
So the reason I asked that is that's exactly what I did. So I was getting tired, and so I just drank more coffee, and then I just drank more coffee, and then all of a sudden I'm having 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day, which is well above what a human should be consuming, and still not feeling energized. So, do you want to move on to like how we treat it, how we test it, or how we like make it go back in the stages?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have found what I do works really, really well. Do you want to talk about what I do first or what I do last?
Yeah, we could talk about what you do.
Yeah. So I have found that the simplest thing is 3 hormones that you take for 3 months at certain times of the day. And it's almost like magic. It just resets your adrenals.
Hmm.
So the 3 hormones are ashwagandha, adrenotrophin, and melatonin. So let's start with ashwagandha and break that one down. Ashwagandha stimulates your adrenals to make more hormones. But if you take just ashwagandha and you have adrenal fatigue, what's going to happen?
You're gonna get tired. You're gonna be
Yes.
like flatline.
Yes, because you're squeezing them again with nothing to give. Okay, so the next one is drenotrophin. Drenotrophin is bovine, and I never remember what bovine is. That pig or cow?
Okay.
Cow. So it's cow adrenal gland desiccated, so dried out, that you take as a supplement, similar to how people take thyroid supplements. Same exact idea, just as necessary. But if we gave you just straight drenotrophin and didn't give you anything else, what would happen?
You would be stressed out.
No, you'd shut down your own production.
Ah, gotcha.
Same as if you took armor thyroid or NP thyroid and you didn't need it, you would just shut down your body's own production. So if you took
Yes.
either of those by themselves, you're going to lead to more problems.
Okay. So that I remember taking this.
Did I put you on these?
I think you told me to get on them, and I found my own sources as a typical biohacker.
Sure.
But I dug into it, and there seems to be a big difference between what you were saying and then most of the supplements out there, because most of the supplements out there have it's like bovine adrenal complex, right?
Yep.
And so it has multiple parts of the adrenals,
Mhm.
and what you're trying to stimulate, I guess, is like the cortisol, but not so much the adrenaline, or something like that, or vice versa.
No, I think you got it right. And even the
Yeah.
company I use, Standard Process, they have two different products, Drenamine and Drenotrophin. Drenamine
Mhm.
has what you're talking about. Drenotrophin is your straight desiccated adrenal gland.
Yeah. And so the issue was if you get the whole part of it and both the hormones,
Mhm.
you get this kind of like continued dysregulation, and so it doesn't
Yeah.
actually help. And that's
Yes.
actually very important. I think the other name of it is adrenal cortex.
Yes.
Is what you're looking for, but it's just cortex. It's not complex. It's not anything
Yes.
else.
So that is Standard Process Drenotrophin is the one you're looking for. And you don't need a
Okay.
prescription to buy this. It's a supplement. So everywhere, don't buy it on Amazon like we talked about, but anywhere else you want, you can buy it. Okay,
Okay, gotcha. So what was your third thing? You said melatonin, right?
melatonin. And people take melatonin to sleep, and that's exactly what we use it for, is when you're taking these supplements, and I'm gonna talk about the timing for them, but when you're taking these supplements, you need the third one, melatonin, to turn off the cortisol, turn off the adrenals. Because when you're on exogenous supplements, when you're taking these, your circadian rhythms all thrown off, and we're trying to retime your system. That's where the melatonin comes in. And for some reason, this is the one people have the hardest time taking. No one ever wants to take melatonin of the three. They'll take the ashwagandha, the drenotrophin most of the time, but then I get a lot of resistance with the melatonin. I don't know why. People just don't want to take it. But it's
There's a
100% necessary.
Yeah, there's a lot of myths out there with melatonin. This whole like it's going to shut down your endogenous production, and I just have not seen that in the literature.
No, I haven't either. I think that's a myth. And two, I put people on literally the lowest dose possible, 5 milligrams. If you've got a lower dose, go ahead and take it. You just need some kind of chemical trigger to turn them off.
Yeah. I think you mean 5 micrograms,
I'm sorry?
or I think it's half a milligram, or point
No,
three
I'm pretty
hundred
sure it's 5
micrograms. I think
milligrams.
is the low dose.
Well, I'm not talking that low. I'm talking like 3 to 5 milligrams.
Yeah,
You need enough, but not.
enough to get it going.
Yes.
Yeah. So I started testing things, and I've been tracking my sleep, and I've been running melatonin, and I started taking it at 3 milligrams,
Mhm.
and then I went to 9, and now I'm at 12.
Okay.
And my sleep keeps getting better. And then I was like, well, am I dependent on this? Is my natural production going down? So I stopped it for a few days.
Mhm.
My sleep was just as good.
Hmm.
So, and I really haven't seen this whole like shuts down your endogenous production. So I don't think there's a fear. There needs to be a fear surrounding melatonin. And we should probably do an episode on melatonin because it's very impressive in terms of, anti-inflammatory and what it does in other aspects.
Yeah. Okay, so here is my secret sauce formula to reversing adrenal fatigue. And it's not guaranteed. The reason that this works is that my patients are also in treatment, treating the primary cause of their adrenal fatigue. If you just take this hoping it'll solve all your problems, it won't. But it will at least buy you temporary relief while we fix your main issues. So between 7 and 9 in the morning, when you wake up, you will take ashwagandha and 1 pill of drenatrophin. Then at lunchtime, between 12 and 1, you will take 1 pill of drenatrophin. Then at dinner time, between 5 and 7 p.m., you will take 1 pill of drenatrophin. And at 10 p.m., you will take 1 pill of melatonin. And that's it. As long as you are consistent, because your body's supposed to spike cortisol levels very slightly at meal times. And so that's what we're trying to reset your body's clock is here's wake up time, here's lunch, here's dinner, here's sleep. Stay on the schedule for 3 months and your body's system will re-regulate.
So that paired with, pulling out toxins or whatever burden the person might have
Yes.
is kind of the 1-2 punch.
Yep. That's exactly it.
I will say the other thing that people don't talk about a lot when it comes to adrenal fatigue, and this one is kind of woo-woo, but the body interprets stress, all stress, the reaction is the same.
Mhm.
So regardless of the type of stress, so this could be toxins, that's a main type of stress. It could be literally, your work is so demanding that you're stressed out there, but it could also be like you're working out too much or you're emotionally stressed.
Yep.
So like if you're in a bad relationship or you've got some serious emotional problems or stressors in your life, like fixing that and removing the toxins while you're going through this adrenal fatigue reset is key, because you don't want to just let these unchecked sources of stress in your life just go and build, because it's going to be a mountain you're climbing. Because even if you remove the toxins, but you have so much emotional and physical stress in your life, it's still not going to be able to fix the problem.
Yep. And that's similar to what we talked about in the last episode with the alcoholism. It's the same exact idea.
Yep.
Fix mental and physical, and you'll be so much better off in fixing one or the other because they're so closely intertwined.
Yeah. From like a biohacker point of view, I mean, we look at fixing, reducing our stress and all the other parts of life. We call it allostatic load. So it's the load of stress that your body is under on everything. So your toxins, your physical, emotional. And the beauty of it is once you get your emotional and your like mental stress way down and you clear out all your toxins, your capacities for stress is much higher. So then you can like pour into work. You can pour into working out, and you still won't go into that adrenal fatigue zone.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Before we move off this subject, I just want to give some brand recommendations just because, like you mentioned earlier, not all these supplements are created equal. I use standard process for my ashwagandha and my drenatrophin. What do you use?
So straight up ashwagandha, I usually use Life Extension. I like their product. It's very affordable. If you're going to go with more of a shotgun formula, so like I have a formula of adaptogens that I run that has like supporting vitamins like B vitamins, Qualia Resilience. That's a good one.
Okay.
And I found this one is pretty great because it has the form of ashwagandha, which is the main ingredient in it. It's called Nuganda, kind of like Black Panther is what it reminds me of. But but it's basically an ashwagandha molecule that they've gotten to the point where it won't bring you down too much. So you get that kind of adaptogen effect where it will kind of help monitor the system and regulate it without bringing you down too much. So that's more of a shotgun formula, though. If you're doing your protocol, it's very specific. I would probably get just straight ashwagandha. This would be something great for like someone in stage 1.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're just trying to
So,
reverse it and you're not having the fatigue, then yeah, that's
yeah.
a great product to use.
Yeah. Stage 1 or 2, where you're like maybe feeling better because you did have the fatigue,
Mhm.
like those, something like that would be good. But once you get into stage 3 and 4, you really need like a structured, like,
Yep.
this is how you're going to do it.
Yeah. And then what do you use for melatonin?
Melatonin, I use Onnit, ONIT spray.
Hmm.
And the reason is because we're trying to go to sleep, right?
Sure.
So I'm not taking a gummy, because if you're taking a gummy, you're eating food
Mhm.
and that's stimulating your digestive system. When your digestive system is going, it's telling your body that sleep is not the thing that we need to be focusing on.
Interesting.
So gummies are out, which leaves you with pills or capsules
Mhm.
and sprays. I like the sprays because I found it gets a little bit of a more acute, quick effect, and
Yep.
helps me shut off and go to sleep. The capsules take a little longer,
Mhm.
and quite frankly, I haven't found a whole bunch that are like in the dosage that I like to take.
You're taking, well, you're taking 5 to 12 milligrams. Thorn has 3 and 5, so you could actually
A
make what you want out of
couple,
capsules.
yeah.
Um,
So if I was going to take it in capsules, though, what I would do is I'd probably take it an hour earlier.
yeah.
So, like when I take it spray,
Mhm.
I'll spray it, I'll leave it in my mouth, and it's like 20 minutes before bed,
Yep.
and I swallow it.
That's a good
So,
tip.
yeah, I like the spray. I'd say avoid gummies for sure,
Mhm. I
because you
agree with
also don't
that.
know what other crap is in the gummies.
Yep. So I think I'm actually switch my patients to that spray. That's a good point that I never really thought about.
Yeah. So that's my favorite product for melatonin. And then if you, yeah, I'm gonna hold off on that. I'm gonna hold off on going into melatonin because I'm
Yeah,
excited. We should do a full episode on melatonin,
absolutely.
because there's applications for super high dose, and it's a very cool molecule.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dispel some adrenal fatigue treatment myths.
Yeah. So adrenal fatigue treatment myths. So the first one that comes to mind is resetting your adrenals, right? And that's kind of the protocol that you said, but a lot of people try to do it a holistic path. And so they basically, what they do is they quit caffeine, all stimulants,
Mhm.
try to like dopamine fast from their foods they love and their phone.
Mhm.
And they do that for a set period of time in hoping that the adrenals will come back to life.
Mhm.
And so the main issue I have with this is it's a myopic point of view. It's assuming that you had so much stress coming in from caffeine and your phone and these other things that are just basic lifestyle things, that's what's causing the adrenal fatigue. But really, like a lot of times for people, it's either toxins or mental or emotional stress is really what it comes down to. So without addressing the psychological stress,
Mhm.
just taking out caffeine, you're just going to feel like crap for however long you're doing the program. Maybe you'll have a little bit of filling of the sponge and you might feel a little better after that time, but it's just going to go right back because you didn't fix the root of the stressors.
Yep.
That's the main one I've heard. You know, the other thing is, and this goes back to testing, like, don't just think you have this, because I've found that most people don't have this. Like thyroid is going to be way more common, thyroid dysregulation, than true adrenal fatigue.
Yeah.
So like if you haven't tested your thyroid and you think you have adrenal fatigue, like please go test your thyroid. So thyroid dysregulation is much more common than adrenal fatigue, in my opinion. I see that much more often. So if you think you have adrenal fatigue, either do the Dutch test, or if you don't want to pay for the Dutch test, first test your thyroid
Mhm.
and AM cortisol. Because if it's your thyroid, you're going to feel sluggish. You're going to feel tired and exhausted all the time. And it may not be your adrenals. Secondly, thyroid dysregulation can actually lead to adrenal fatigue.
Mhm.
So if your thyroid's not pumping out thyroid, you don't have enough energy, which causes your adrenals to squeeze harder to keep you running. So if you haven't checked your thyroid, please do that prior to looking into any of this.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. That's why, when patients come into my office, we do thyroid testing, cortisol testing, and like 20 other vials of blood, all at the same time, just to get a good outlook. And we talked about all this in the previous episode. If you want more details about that, just go back. I think it was like episode 3 or 4.
Mhm.
But yeah, you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just pick and choose certain things. And unfortunately, I get that once in a while as patients would come to me and they're like, I don't have insurance. Which test should I do? And that's the hardest question because I'm honestly taking a guess at which blood work you need because I have no idea until we do it.
Yeah. With my clients, what I do is I like have this extensive health history form that they go through.
Mhm.
And then from there, I kind of like, I think we should like investigate these areas.
Yeah.
And 80% of the time it's a hit, but there's 10 or 20% of the time it's like a miss because we didn't pull the whole range of what we could look for.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Anything else on adrenal dysregulation, burnout? Actually, I mean, that's a good point. Burnout is probably what we would associate stage 4 adrenal fatigue with.
That's what stage 4 is known as. Yep, it's burnout.
Burnout. So, like when people say I'm burnt out, it's not just a millennial buzzword. it's also, it can be literally tied to biological processes. So, like if you don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning and you don't know how you're going to keep doing your job, like maybe investigate your thyroid and your adrenals because it might be that you actually have biological issues and you're not just like down on willpower and you're burnt out.
Yep. Absolutely.
I've had people say that there's no such thing as burnout. It's just you're lazy. And that's not the case. Like you can literally have biological reasons why you're not functioning correctly.
That's exactly it. And on that note, I think that ends it.
There we go. Well, don't get burnout, folks. Or if you're going to do burnout, do it in a car because that's fun. Thank you for joining us. I am Coach Kyle. You can find me at Toxin Free Kyle on Instagram.
And I'm Dr. K, or the OsteoDoc on Instagram. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peak Performance Podcast, your #1 resource for today's top health hacks and facts. You can follow us on Instagram at the Peak Performance Pod or on X at Peak Perform Pod. You can also check out our website and weekly blogs at peakperformancepodcast.online. Again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. We put out a new podcast every Thursday. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purposes of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, carefully read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the product. Information found or received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or should you have any healthcare questions, please promptly call or see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Coach Kyle, Dr. K, and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of the information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein.